The big problem for the Romans with the Christians was that the Christians dared to ridicule the complete absurdities of the pagan superstitions, and the Christians were ardent in trying to gain new members to the faith. Nor did they only attack the religion of Rome, but also the different shapes and forms under which superstition appeared in the various countries where they were living. From this, the Romans concluded that the Christian sect was not only insupportably daring and arrogant, but moreover an enemy to the public tranquility, and every way proper to excite civil wars and commotions, and in every way they might excite civil wars and commotions in the empire. It is probably on this account that Tacitus, a Roman historian, reproaches them with the odious characters of haters of mankind and styles the religion of Jesus as destructive superstition. Another item Mosheim wrote, I think it was Mosheim, that bothered many of the Romans about the Christians was the simplicity of the worship, which was totally different from the sacred rites of any other people. The Christians had no sacrifices, no temples, no images, no oracles, no sacerdotal orders. That means they didn't have all kinds of priests and ministers and monks and all kinds of stuff. And this was sufficient to bring upon them the reproaches of an ignorant population who imagined that there could be no such religion without any of these. Persecution in the church by Roman authority began in the reign of Emperor Nero, which was AD 64, and continued to the time of Constantine, which was AD 305, about 250 years. There were periods of comparatively less persecution, but the church was the constant object of some kind of heathen oppression for about 250 years. That's a long time. Some Christian writers, in their thinking, divided the persecutions into 10 separate events and suggested some weirdly symbolic relationship between the 10 persecutions that they chose to list and the 10 plagues of Egypt and the 10 horns mentioned by John the Revelator in Revelation. We know from history, however, that the number of severe persecutions was less than 10, while the total number of all official persecutions, including the regional ones in the cities and the provinces, and assaults limited to a short period of time, were many more than 10. The first persecutions under a Roman emperor were, of course, by Nero, AD 64, and during the last few years of his criminal reign, a large part of Rome was destroyed by fire. Nero was believed by many of the people in Rome to have set the fire himself. They thought maybe he wanted to clear a whole bunch of terrain so he could build a bigger palace, and he got away. However, rather than accept responsibility, Nero said it was the Christians who did it, and he had a bunch of Christians rounded up and tortured to try to force them to confess to something that they hadn't done. The non-Christian writer Tacitus, whose integrity is beyond question, described what happened. With this view, he, Nero, inflicted the most exquisite tortures on those men who, under the vulgar appellation of Christians, were already branded with deserved infamy. In other words, they deserved to be called criminals. They derived their name and origin from Christ, who in the reign of Tiberius had suffered death by the sentence of the procurator Pontius Pilate. For a while, this dire superstition was checked, but it again burst forth and not only spread itself over Judea, the first seat of this mischievous sect, but was even introduced into Rome, the common asylum which receives and protects whatever is impure, whatever is atrocious. The confessions of those that were seized discovered a great multitude of their accomplices. In other words, those people who were tortured confessed to having there were other members of their families and friends who were Christians. And they were all convicted, not so much for the crime of setting fire to the city as for their hatred of humankind. They died in torments, and their torments were embittered by insults and derision. Some were nailed on crosses, others sewn up in the skins of wild beasts and exposed to the fury of dogs, others again smeared over with combustible materials, were used as torches to illuminate the darkness of the night. The gardens of Nero were destined for the melancholy spectacle which was accompanied by a horse race, and honored with the presence of the emperor who mingled with the populace in the dress and attitude of a charioteer. The guilt of Christians deserved, indeed, the most exemplary punishments, but the public abhorrence was changed into commiseration, which means sympathy, from the opinion that those unhappy wretches were sacrificed not so much to the public welfare as to the cruelty of a jealous tyrant. There is some disagreement among historians as to whether or not the persecution Nero started was just in the city of Rome, but most scholars believe that the governors in the provinces and the cities followed the example of the emperor, and that the persecution was pretty common throughout the whole empire. Nobody wanted Nero to think they didn't take his side. The first persecution ended when Nero died in AD 68. Tradition says that the apostles Paul and Peter were martyred at Rome at that time, Paul by being beheaded, Peter by being crucified, and as I recall, upside down. And there's one other tradition that says Peter's wife was martyred just before he died, but there is no really authoritative written record describing those events. The second persecution began in 94 AD in the reign of Emperor Domitian. Both Christians and Jews were persecuted because both refused to bow to or worship the statues Domitian had erected to himself all over the empire, so his subjects would not have to come to Rome to pay homage to him. They had chapels and little temples to him all over the place. There was also a rumor that the emperor was supposedly in danger of losing his throne because of a prophecy that from the family of which Jesus belonged there would arise one who would weaken, if not overthrow, the power of Rome. Using this as his excuse, he had many innocent people killed. Von Mosheim and others tell us that the persecution only ended after a few years because of the emperor's death at the age of 44. However, Eusebius, who wrote in the 300s, quotes an earlier writer, who we don't have any record of, who tells us that Domitian had all the living descendants of Jesus' family brought to Rome, and after questioning them, he realized that they were no danger to him, and he ordered the persecution to stop. It is also believed that while Domitian was emperor, that the apostle John was banished for some years to the island of Patmos, where he received his revelation. The third major persecution to the Christian church took place during the reign of Emperor Trajan. He was emperor from 98 to 117 AD. He's often thought of as one of the best of the Roman emperors, but he agreed to the deadly persecution of the Christians because they would not sacrifice to Roman gods. Not sacrificing to the Roman gods might not seem like a big thing to you, but as far as the Romans were concerned, if you did not sacrifice to their gods and keep their gods happy, that was the reason why there were terrible storms, why there were wars, why there were diseases, why there were earthquakes, why there were ships lost at sea. Everything bad that happened because somebody screwed up and didn't do something right for the gods. And so when they had people in the Roman Empire who refused to worship their gods, those people were viewed essentially as enemies of the state, and they could be killed. And the normal people, the regular day-to-day people, were the ones who would do this. If you were known to be Christian and you would not sacrifice to the gods, you would not participate in whatever worship was there, you wouldn't bow down in front of the statues of the emperor and whatever else was required, you were considered public enemy number one, and anybody who wanted to could and would do anything to you. We have two interesting letters. One long letter from Pliny the Younger, who was the governor of the province of Pontus, which is the area of northern Turkey that is on the southern border of the Black Sea. And he wrote to Trajan because he wanted some advice as to how he should treat Christians. And we have a short letter back from Trajan, the emperor, to his governor, Pliny, telling him how to handle the Christians and what he was supposed to do. I'll read both letters in the next division, next part.